and welcome to this ExchangeWire VoxPop. Ahead of ATS Singapore on the 3rd and 4th of October, I'm delighted to be joined from Singapore by Alberico de Nardis, who is Head of Southeast Asia and Australia and New Zealand at LoopMe.
Yes.
Hello, Alberico.
We go by Albi.
Albi. Hello, Albi. Brilliant. That's much easier for me too. And I wanted to obviously ask you about, there's lots of things about kind of APAC trends and kind of what the key, I guess, exciting trends you're seeing in APAC regarding transformation, and if you're seeing in that region in particular versus the rest of the world any kind of, early adoption regarding things like AI and what things we should be kind of focusing on and be excited about.
Yeah, I mean, the part that I've been most fascinated with, I've been in Singapore 8 years, and I think, especially if we talk about AI, and you're bringing it up, the first region around the world that comes to mind tends to be Silicon Valley. And especially for a consumer side, you go straight to the famous American companies. But I'd be a little bit hesitant to forget about APAC as a whole.
Yeah.
And then in key markets as well, we're looking at some of the work being done in Australia, in Singapore, in Korea, in China. And China's clearly on a totally different level to Southeast Asia as well.
Absolutely.
APAC is the fastest growing AI market in the world. There are agencies a few years ago were probably using it more as a buzzword with brands. Now I think it's dominating every single conversation. We probably only used it in 60% of our meetings with the senior agencies and brands that we worked with. And now every single time it's one of the opening slides of, we're proud of our patents in the AI world.
That's interesting.
Our product is based on the AI that we've developed. And so we're now not forcing it upon clients, but actually being asked about it. I think that's a really interesting way of just seeing where the conversations move to over really the last 3 to 4 years.
It's being led by them now.
Now they're really asking us,
Yeah.
well, what do you have in this space? And my team and myself are being trained to go, well, actually, we want to drive that conversation. So what is our narrative around it, rather than waiting to be asked what we're doing in the space? Not only AI, I think if we're looking into the mobile gaming space, globally it's grown, I don't even want to guess how many X over the last few years, but we're predicting it to become $230 billion market in APAC in the next 3 to 4 years. So if we look at the opportunities, it's not just the opportunity for us to work with the inventory and work with users in a different way, but also how do we reach new people that maybe haven't been able to be reached before? And in a region, especially Southeast Asia, obsessed by reach, to be able to identify these sort of unreachable audiences that don't really use social media as much and don't have access to live TV, mobile gaming is such a great way to get in there without spending too much and still having a really engaged, really interested audience who haven't really been having that brand interaction that they've been craving for the last while. Another one in terms of transformation, but I think it's interesting with Southeast Asia or with APAC as a whole, I think stereotypically it might have been looked at as a bit of a risk-averse market, not wanting to, really focusing on innovation, but wanting to see someone else having done it first. I think over the last few years, I've definitely seen that changing in Southeast Asia predominantly, of some brands going out and saying, no, we want to be first, and we want to be first in Asia, not wait until Australia or the UK or the US, the more established markets, have maybe trialed, tested something before, are actually coming out pretty clearly in doing so. And I think on the brand side, we're seeing it with companies like Unilever and Coca-Cola having big centers of excellence or decision-making power coming from Southeast Asia. Kind of proves that point that they're really basing a lot of their innovation and their testing and learning from that market, rather than waiting for it to be done in a more established one.
That's really exciting. And we've been saying for many, many years that the region is one to watch, and don't just count your chickens and put your eggs in the US basket or the Western basket. Actually, there's some really exciting things happening over there as well. Yeah.
And similar to that, I mean, we've been using the word, since I've been in the industry, it's always seemed to be, it's the year of mobile. And then
absolutely.
But we're still using that phrase in different ways. But it's nice now to start having kind of disappearing away from just talking about devices or formats or what screens content is appearing on, and instead really going back to the person, not even the customer. I've really always hated that word, but more the people that we are trying to speak to and interact with. How are they engaging? What are they talking about? How are they looking at content and behaving every day? I think over the last few years, I think TikTok's probably been the biggest platform to really shout about that, of just the success that a platform like that's had to come in and say, let's take some money away from the duopoly, or competing with TV in a way that maybe no other digital platform had really been able to tackle as well before.
That is such a good point.
And great to see it coming out of Asia as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And so, Albie, you mentioned there the people aspect of things and how it's not so much about screens and devices and formats, it's now more about the person at the end of an ad. How do you think the consumer attitudes in APAC are changing, and how do you think the requirements of us as an advertising industry are evolving and need to evolve to meet those changing consumer needs?
It's a really great point. I don't think it's overly different as much as we are a totally different market. I don't think it's overly different to what we're seeing in the rest of the world. Let's take DE&I as an example. That definitely started in other regions, but if we look at over the last year, there have been more and more studies. And we're seeing, even in Singapore, which is an unbelievably diverse melting pot of millions of different people and cultures and everything, 78% of Singapore consumers said that DE&I is something that they take into consideration when choosing a brand, working with a brand, etc. I don't know what that number would have been a few years ago, but to see it up at that level now, which I think reflects Europe and the US, is a way to show, don't look at Asia in a totally different way. We are actually still people with thoughts and feelings and all the rest. And similar to that, I think sustainability always comes into the conversation as well. When it comes to advertising, the way that we've been speaking to our clients and our partners has been, we need the brand or we want the brand really to be the leading voice. The brands listen to the consumers, so ultimately it still always comes down to what the people are looking for.
Yeah.
It's harder when it comes from an agency or an ad tech partner or a big multinational platform or anyone else. We don't have that access to the day-to-day consumer. We still want to know what the big brands are looking to do, where they're putting their eggs, what's their big focus on for the next year, so that we can go off and build the products that enable them to do what they're looking to do, what they're looking to change, how they're looking to partner with their own consumers and people and customers and employees. And just how everyone feels, not just who's the person who buys the product at the supermarket, is the person who works for the company, and how everyone really fits in. D&I, sustainability, I think we can touch on sustainability more and more and more. And
definitely.
It absolutely keeps coming up. And we can look at what we've done as well. Over the last couple of years, we've managed to exceed all of our benchmarks and get to ad net zero in 2.5 years instead of by 2030. So it's 7 years ahead of schedule.
That's very impressive.
And now being able to go into an agency and actually have a conversation about how we can run all of their media buying sustainably, on sustainable PMPs, working with specific publishers, on DE&I specific PMPs, only working with certain publishers owned by certain categories of people. I think that just becomes a really interesting one to start speaking to agencies and brands on a much more human level, rather than bringing everything down to a number or a dollar sign or a click or an impression. Another one in terms of what people are speaking about, and I think this is not new, and I think in APAC it's really, really important, is personalization at scale with impact. If we look at Southeast Asia alone, there are over 1,200 languages over the 650, 700 million people. In Europe, across all of Europe, with a population roughly the same, there are about 200, 250. So if we just look at the different groups of cultures, and with every language there is an element of a different demographic and a different culture and a different way of life. So if we're not speaking to everyone individually, you are just bucketing entire countries up together. Indonesia's always been my favorite example of over 14,000 islands, many uninhabited, many inhabited, hundreds of different languages, thousands of different cultures, multiple religions across one island to the rest. It is really important to start looking at who you're reaching, how you're speaking to them, not just from a am I being sensitive approach, but just on a human level. Absolutely. How are you getting them to engage with you? How are you getting them to interact with you? And so it's important that we start leveraging all that data and technology in the right way to be able to get that mass personalization approach across all the 13 markets that we operate in, at least for LoopMe in Southeast Asia and Australia and New Zealand and North APAC.
That's a really interesting point. And so I want to bring us back to the topic of AI, and we talked a lot about sustainability just now, and I want to get an understanding of how AI is useful in the realm of sustainability and indeed transparency too, also a very, very hot topic. The two are very closely interlinked and intertwined because one often drives the other without even intending to. How are we defining AI in the context of those two big topics, and kind of how can AI help?
I think it's how can AI help apart from just those two, in a vast range of other topics as well. And I said this when speaking with your colleagues very recently, AI has just this unmatched ability to analyze, process huge amounts of data very, very, very quickly in real time. And so let's take sustainability as a great example. If we're able to start looking at predictive modeled audiences rather than always looking at historical data, so let's take lookalike as an example, we're able to start really understanding who is going to behave in what way in the future rather than person X behaved like this in the past, and therefore we hope that they're likely to do so again. Without AI, there is no way that any human being on Earth is able to look at all that data the second the bid requests are coming through and decide which impressions to start bidding on, etc.
Of course.
And so that's the way that we've started doing it as well, is by using all of our AI models and optimizing towards predictive modeled audiences, towards genuine real world outcomes like their increase in brand affinity, brand preference, awareness, consideration, intent to actually go out and purchase a product or a service. We're not taking old data, and especially over the last few years, when people have behaved very, very differently to how they may have done in the past and how they will continue doing so again now, historical data is just not as accurate anymore.
Right, okay.
And so to be able to actually take all these predictive modeled audiences using an AI platform allows us to, one, be way more specific with who we're going to be, who we're trying to reach. But on the flip side of that, which helps the sustainability angle, make sure that we're not reaching uninterested users. That we're not bidding on impressions that we're not interested in winning, on all the way to the back, and saving on all of the data costs, which end up being able to be better for the environment, for water, and everything around the planet. So if we look at the sustainability approach, AI has an unbelievable impact in it just by being able to do it via a machine rather than needing hundreds of people to look at older data. There was a recent study, I think, done by Dentsu and Kantar that said across APAC, only 1 in 3 marketing teams are achieving their own sustainability targets.
Interesting.
So it's a really good point for now to be going in and saying, well, if we know that 66% aren't necessarily where they wanted to be maybe at the beginning of the year or a couple of years ago, to be able to go in and actually offer simple off-the-shelf solutions that go, we have solved problems A, B, and C, and there is a way that you can start hitting those targets internally as well. And now that we've been speaking to brands and agencies about our sustainable PMPs, who we are, what we believe in, and what the work and the effort that we've done to get to this point, there's a lot of really positive responses from a lot of agencies who are genuinely interested in making a difference, who want to work with their partners and their brands in a different way, who have got their own process in place to measure. And on the transparency point, I think measurement is something that then comes back into play. Without having a good measurement platform around, it's very difficult to know, or at that point then to share any data back with your partners. So for us to then be able to look at everything all the way through the system and say that we are already, through all the work that we've done, 95% carbon neutral through our own internal processes, and then the rest goes through qualified, validated carbon removal projects rather than carbon avoidance projects, really helps us close that gap up to the 100%. And also gives, with some brands, gives us a way into the door. We're able to actually come in with a different conversation and just open up our suite of products and solutions to have a new point of view and a new conversation to start with them.
Brilliant. And that leads me brilliantly into my next question, which is, of course, around measurement. Obviously, there is a lot of, not concern, but kind of challenging times at the moment, and marketers are really constraining budgets and kind of keeping a close eye on budgets and how they're performing. What are you seeing in terms of demands and requirements around measurement and being able to measure what success looks like and what KPIs are looking like and ROI, kind of what are you seeing from the marketer side and how at LoopMe kind of dealing with that?
It's a really interesting question, and there's this one example that I've used quite a lot of, we were pitching a few years ago, and they'd asked us to start with measurement rather than normally keep it at the end of the presentation. So it's always traditionally been strategy and planning and buying approach and maybe your rates and whatever else, and then how do you measure everything that you've just spoken about. But seeing a brand come in and go, no, this is where we want to focus on, really shift a lever maybe in my head and went, okay, actually, let's start with this side. If we look at just over the last couple of years, obviously everyone's starting to be very careful, not only brands, definitely not only agencies, but even I think consumers with where does every dollar go and am I getting the best bang for my buck?
Absolutely.
Starting to see definitely a clearer focus on the lower funnel.
Right.
And I think in Southeast Asia, but across all of APAC, there's been a lot of a push towards it and show me real-time, very quick, instant results.
Having always been a fairly performance-focused region anyway, right? Yeah.
And even more so now.
Right.
I think there's definitely been a bit of a shift in brands that maybe might have had a difference between their brand budget and their more lower funnel budget, just combined everything. But I also use that as a different example, which at LoopMe we speak about quite a lot, of it should never have been about brand and performance. It could have been upper funnel and lower funnel, but performance should be across the board.
Yes.
And now we're starting seeing agencies in particular have all of their digital, who would have been called a digital planner, are all now performance marketers. And whether you're doing upper funnel or lower funnel, you are still driving performance in one way or another. So at LoopMe, we've taken that conversation and developed an entire series of products and solutions around them.
Great.
Of performance having traditionally been spoken about in the lower funnel on more of a direct response, click to buy, download, install, book, whatever else it might have been. We're now taking that to say, well, performance shouldn't just be the last end of the funnel, and instead should be across it. And in the more branding activations in the past, we've always seen let's optimize towards clicks, towards video views, only recently towards attention metrics, and even that, maybe there's a bit of a struggle in many markets around how do we actually optimize towards them in real time. With LoopMe, we've built our solutions to be able to say, let's record, analyze, measure, and then optimize towards your brand outcomes in real time, or your upper funnel performance in real time. So metrics like an increase in brand awareness, like favorability or preference versus a competitor, or a change in mindset of how you look at one product versus another, all the way down to purchase intent in that middle funnel space. Right. And then once you've got all this data, it should, and it is, very easy to then go off and go, well, we understand these audiences far better than ever before if we were only looking at who's looking at a non-skippable ad or who's clicking on a mobile ad format. And now going, no, I actually understand how you've gone from awareness to consideration to purchase intent, and now we can drive them further into the lower funnel, again, more sustainably, because we've got such a deeper understanding of these audiences that it's not still more of a, call it a spray and pray approach and just see what sticks. It's a lot clearer of, we understand how they transitioned from, I still hate using the funnel example, but in the more traditional side, from the upper to the bottom, and be able to do it accurately, cheaper for a brand, less wastage, transparently, with a platform, with that measurement platform that allows you to see everything we're doing in real time. So you get the real impression of, okay, I understand why you're optimizing towards this type of creative, that language, this market, that product, because it is driving your users down that marketing funnel.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. I think it will be everything you mentioned there will be a big topic of conversation on stage at ATS Singapore this year. And that leads me to the last question. I can't let you go without asking you what you're looking forward to at ATS Singapore this year.
Yes, I mean, everything we've spoken about today. I think Singapore in itself, and we forget about it maybe in other markets around the world, because we always hear Singapore, Singapore, Singapore. Singapore is an island of 5.5 million people. The rest of Southeast Asia is where the other 655 million people live. So for us, we might be the little hub, but it's only moments like ATS where we see the technologists and the leaders and the visionaries, the decision makers come in from Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, China, Australia, come to one market. And especially over the last years when maybe travel's been a little bit more limited and we're all trying to save a couple of dollars by not jet setting around the world constantly. It is nice to have a few moments of the year where people do congregate in a couple of cities around the region and talk about sustainability, D&I, AI, transformation, and listening to how another market is doing it. And taking on that note, what we spoke about earlier of how China are behaving and leading in some spaces, to be able to have that direct interaction with someone is so much better than watching a video on YouTube or reading an article. It's really nice to listen to them in person, be able to put your hand up, ask a question, get to know them, and get to work with people in a slightly different way. And the same one for me on a personal level, it's exactly that. It's always a moment to walk around, give a few handshakes, and speak to people that you don't get the chance to speak to every day. It's nice to take a day away from your desk and go back to more of university life and just sit down, shut up and learn, listen. And I think we'll never go back to having all of this constantly just on Zoom.
Yes,
it's so
exactly.
nice to have it back to person.
Well, I'm biased, but I totally agree with everything you said there. On that note, we shall end it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Albie.
Thank you very much.
And Albie and I are looking forward to seeing you at ATS Singapore. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.